What if I told you that the real reason that you can't lose any fat mass is because you're too stressed out? I recently made a reel over on Instagram on this very topic and it seemed to gain a little bit of traction. So today I'm here to explain things in a little bit more detail. Because you could be eating all the right things, you could be training hard and sleeping okay, but if you've not got control over your stress levels, you will never predictably or sustainably lose any fat mass. My name is Sam Gerlin. I'm the founder of Gerlin Nutrition. I'm a fully qualified nutritionist and I'm a health and fitness coach. I've taken people like Ed here from a place of relative dejection. You know, he had ulcerative colitis and we ended up taking him to run half marathons. I've also taken Annie from, again, a place of relative dejection. She didn't really have a lot of knowledge around her nutrition and she ended up competing at the turf games with proper fueling strategies. But as I say, today, the topic is stress. We're going to be talking about how you can reduce your stress levels and manage your stress levels to make sure that you get to where you want to be with your health and fitness goals. I'm going to be going through some points that I covered on that Instagram reel and expanded on them in a little bit more detail. If you see me looking down here, it's because I've got my laptop here, make sure I'm covering all the points that I need to. But anyway, let's get stuck straight into this because I realise I've been waffling on a little bit there. And we'll start with, exactly what stress is, how it manifests in the body. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of cortisol, which is our primary stress hormone. Now, cortisol is, actually beneficial for us, beneficial for the body in the short term. That is important to mention. And, it's something that a lot of people often overlook. Stress, puts us into this sort of fight or flight survival mode. We've all heard of adrenaline. Cortisol is sort of a precursor to that and sort of stimulates that whole process. But what is also important to acknowledge is that cortisol does not discriminate between, running from a lion, from an evolutionary perspective, running from a lion and getting stressed out at work or getting stressed out with your partner or trying to meet a work deadline, So there's no way of stress and our cortisol levels discriminating between these sorts of things. Stress is stress to the body, okay? And now elevated levels of cortisol result in fat accumulation in the body. Now you might be asking why, how can that possibly be? Effectively, the purpose of cortisol is to put us in that fight or flight survival mode, okay? And the way that it does this is that it releases energy. So imagine it extracts energy from the body. So whether that be, releasing glycogen stores, which are our stored glucose, and just gets, the blood and these energy sources flowing around the body. If this energy is not used in any way, shape or form, so a good way to think about this is if you were getting chased by a lion and cortisol was triggered, released energy, you'd be actively using that energy. So it's going to good use. But if you're sat at your desk stressing about a work deadline or, you've just had a row with the missus and you're sat on the sofa watching your program, but you can't think about anything else and it's doing your head in, you're not actively using that energy for anything. Okay, there's a bit of brain power going on there, but there's not much else. That's okay in the short term, okay? But if you're chronically stressed, so if you're stressed in the long term and you can't get a hold of your stress levels, you can't manage them, you've got to imagine if your stress and cortisol levels are always high, your glucose levels are always going to be high because, as I mentioned, the body is extracting glucose from its stores to, increase our energy levels. Okay, so if you've always got high cortisol, you've always got high blood sugar. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip of my coffee here before we continue. Oh, that's better. Needed that. Had a bit of a dry mouth going on there. Anyway, high cortisol, high blood sugar. High blood sugar means high insulin levels. Now, what's the significance of that? High insulin levels will be the primary sort of mechanism that triggers the fat storage, okay? Insulin is a fat storing hormone, effectively. Yes, it's, plays a role in the uptake of glucose into the working cells, but ultimately, all the time that is happening, you are storing fat, Okay, so again, just to reiterate that sort of cycle that we've got going on there. Your stress levels are high, your cortisol levels are high, so are your blood glucose levels, so is your insulin. What's important to acknowledge, what's important to consider is this causes an accumulation of fat, especially around the abdominal and the visceral areas, which is obviously not good for health. But the bottom line is you're storing fat and you're not using it. And that is why you won't be able to lose any fat mass if you're chronically and constantly stressed. So that's point number one that I wanted to touch on. Another reason that being stressed is not good for fat loss is your appetite hormones. Okay, so elevated levels of cortisol also disrupts our hunger hormones. So think ghrelin and leptin. I'm not sure if you've heard of those before, but ghrelin is our hunger hormone. Ghrelin is the hormone that is released when the body wants us to eat. And leptin is our satiety hormone. So it's the hormone that is released to tell us that we are full. When cortisol is chronically elevated, our levels of ghrelin are increased, our levels of leptin are decreased. So we're hungry more often. And what happens when we're hungry? We're going to eat more, we're going to put more fat mass on, okay? And it's not just a case of being hungry for the right kinds of foods. It's often, those hyper palatable, ultra processed foods that we tend to crave because, they're the quick fixes. This is where this idea of emotional eating comes from. We've all been there where we've been stressed or we've been, perhaps a little bit upset, disappointed, angry. And they're all stressors to the body. Again, going back to the original point that I made, the body doesn't discriminate. The body doesn't know the difference between stress from running from a lion or a bit of stress from work or a little bit of anger. It's all stress to the body. So it's all emotionally tied in a way. So that's why I'm sure you've been there. We've all been there where you're a little bit stressed out and you reach for, the chocolate drawer or you're ordering that Domino's. That's the way it works. So again, our stress, our elevated levels of stress can impact our hunger and satiety hormones, ghrelin and leptin. That is point number two, and the reason that you should consider lowering your stress if you want to lose fat mass. Point number three is on sleep and recovery. Notice at the start of this, I said you might be sleeping okay, because what tends to be the case is even if you are eating well, you are training well, if you're stressed, it's likely to impact your sleep. Okay, you're not likely to sleep as well as you typically would do. High cortisol is going to result in poor sleep quality. Simply put, even if you feel like you're getting your 8-9 hours of restful sleep, you don't know how that's actually impacting the quality of that sleep. There's so much being left on the table if you're always stressed out. And poor sleep, so let's say that you are sleeping badly, this is where the cycle sort of continues. So you're stressed, you're not getting the best quality sleep, that leads to, further increased stress, and also things like less growth hormone. So growth hormone is responsible for the reparation of muscle and recovery, of course, and it can impact that. And it also increases or decreases fat metabolism as well. So all of this starts to link together, and it also disrupts again our hunger hormones. Poor sleep has been, shown to disrupt again ghrelin and leptin. So again, it just accentuates that cycle. The next point that I should touch on, you can see how this is getting pretty, how deep this really does go and why it is so important to prioritize your stress levels. Is muscle breakdown. Okay, so muscle also breaks down proteins for fuel. Okay, so if you've exhausted all of your other energy sources, as I say, cortisol is energy releasing to get us into that survival mode, that fight or flight mode. It will then turn to muscle mass and start eating into that as a source of fuel, which is obviously not ideal, because the less muscle mass we have, the lower our metabolism is once more. So, what can end up happening is by breaking down the muscle mass and storing the fat mass, you might not be seeing any fluctuations in your weight in, the space of a few weeks or a few months. But the longer that goes on, you'll be degrading your muscle mass, adding fat mass, which means effectively muscle is like the cornerstone of our metabolism. I think it's 8 to 10 calories to feed a pound of muscle or something like that. Bear with me because I've actually got that written down here. It's actually 1 pound of muscle burns 6 to 10 calories per day at rest compared to 2 to 3 calories per day for fat. So you can see how sort of metabolically expensive losing muscle mass is compared to fat mass. Okay, so again, another point there just to accentuate this whole topic and why it is so important to keep tabs on your stress levels. And it begs the question, what can we actually do about it? How can we manage our stress levels? Because, you know, in this day and age, I've just knocked the camera there. In this day and age, I totally appreciate that it is a very stressful time to be alive. There is a lot going on, you know, with the presence of social media. It can make things really difficult. You're seeing, you know, Johnny and Sue doing double decent at work and you're thinking, why can't I be there? Or you're seeing so-and-so in IB for having it large and you're thinking, why can't I be there? It's, you know, it's comparison. It can prove stressful. You see everything, you know, you're seeing your ex, whatever it is, you get my point. You know, it is a stressful environment. It is a stressful time to be alive. And it begs the question, as I say, how can we manage this? How can we keep on top of it? Point number one, and I can't stress this enough, pardon the pun, is you've got to prioritize your sleep. Okay, one of the best ways to manage our stress and make sure that we're recovering efficiently, we're recovering properly, is to just prioritize your sleep. If I can speak. Sleep is ultimately going to boost your recovery. It's going to lower your stress levels. You're going to wake up feeling a lot more rested, a lot more chilled out. So if there's one piece of advice I can give you to manage your stress levels is to sleep at least 7, if not aim for 8 or 9 hours of sleep per night. Because the worst thing you can do is when you're stressed, and I know it can be difficult and there are some techniques that can be adopted to promote restful sleep. That's coming in another video, so do stay tuned and hit that subscribe button because there'll be some videos on sleep and how to optimize your sleep environment coming very soon. But yeah, prioritize your sleep. You can also practice some mindfulness. So for me personally, journaling really, really does help. I know it sounds a little bit woo-woo, but you know, I sit down every morning, I jot my thoughts onto a piece of paper, and it really helps me keep on top of my stress levels and manage that. Another one is obviously meditation. You can sit there, you can shut your eyes. For me personally, I've always struggled to really sit there for extended periods of time, but if I can just find 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes to sit there with my eyes shut, a few deep breaths, it really does, you know, sort of give me that little reset and sets me up for the day. So that is another thing that you can try. Another one for me is exercise. So whether that be a walk, often, you know, just after my lunch, when I've probably built up a little bit of stress from the morning's work, I'll go out 15 minutes, a little walk, sorts my head right out, or I'll go to the gym. I'll, you know, pump some iron, or I'll go for a run, or whatever it may be. Exercise can be a really good moderator and manager of our stress levels. Another one, which is one that I often fall victim to, is limiting stimulants. So you can see I'm here drinking my coffee, not heeding my own advice. But especially, you know, in the evening and afternoon where it can start to disrupt and impact our sleep, stay away from the stimulants. So that, you know, obviously includes alcohol, it includes nicotine where possible. Obviously there's a time and a place for these sorts of things, but if you're particularly stressed, the worst thing you can do is, you know, add to that by smashing stimulants all the time. Another one is actually structuring into your weekly routine some genuine downtime. Now, I'm not talking about going out with the boys or going out with the girls for brunch or down the boozer and getting smashed. I'm talking about genuine downtime where, you know, you take your time away from screens, you just chill out. You might read a book. For me, this has proved, you know, a real game changer. I often try to read a little bit before I go to bed each night. It just helps bring, you know, those stress levels from being up here and just bringing them down to a place where, you know, I can get a restful night's sleep. You might do that on a Sunday. I find that particularly helpful. I like a sauna on a Sunday, just to, you know, take some time away from my phone. Don't touch my phone, don't touch screens, no contact, just an hour or two in and out of the sauna with a little bit of cold plunging. That's my time to really reset and bring those stress levels down. And then of course, you know, being a nutritionist, it'd be a failure of me not to mention this, but nutrition really does help. Okay, it genuinely does. It's often overlooked. Like, people say, oh, how can, you know, eating the right things genuinely lower stress levels? But if you're prioritizing whole foods, you're eating plenty of anti-inflammatories, antioxidants, you know, you're getting plenty of veggies, all the obvious ones, your fruits, your dark berries, you're getting plenty of protein as well. That obviously does help. You know, I mentioned that chronically high stress levels can be catabolic and break down your protein or your muscle mass. But if you're getting enough protein, that sort of combats that and prevents that, because protein is, of course, anabolic. It promotes the growth and repair of muscle. So that, of course, does help. But getting plenty of anti-inflammatory and antioxidant foods will most definitely contribute too. So those are some ways that you can combat this and help to manage your stress levels. As I say, stay tuned, because this topic goes deeper than just, you know, a 15 to 20 minute video can explain. I could sit here and probably do 2 hours podcast on this and really get deep into some of the topics, but I prefer to do these bite-sized little videos. So, you know, stay tuned for one on sleep, where I talk about sleep environment and how you can really optimize your sleep. And we can dive into some anti-inflammatory nutrition tips as well. I've also got some stuff on exercise coming as well, and supplementation and stimulants too. So that is reason to hit that subscribe button and like and comment. I really would appreciate that. But no, that is what I wanted to touch on today. And just to recap one last time, the reason you need to manage your stress levels is because chronically high elevated levels of cortisol result in chronically high elevated levels of glucose, which means you've got high levels of insulin, which means you're always going to be storing fat as opposed to utilizing it. It also impacts our hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin. It impacts our sleep cycles. And what was the last point that I mentioned? It also breaks down our muscle mass. Okay, so there's 4 points there, 4 reasons that high levels of stress are impacting your ability to lose fat mass and ultimately reach your health and fitness goals. A big part of the client that I mentioned at the start of this video, Ed, a big part of the reason that he was struggling with his health and fitness goals was because he was chronically, you know, inflamed. He had high levels of stress in the body. Again, it wasn't necessarily stress from work or anything else. His gut was inflamed, which is a stressor. There might have been a bit of stress there from work as well. I know that we did discuss that. But we had to bring down his stress levels with techniques that I've mentioned today. A big concentration was on his nutrition, of course. And we ended up turning it around so that we reduced his stress levels and then enabled him to go out there and experiment with things like running half marathons, which is exactly what he was able to do. So the proof was in the pudding there with Ed. It was also in the pudding there with Annie, as I mentioned as well. Plenty of my clients have come from a place of relative stress and managed to, you know, get over that to pursue their health and fitness goals, performance related health and fitness goals. If you haven't watched one of my last videos on, you know, setting performance goals as opposed to traditional fat and weight loss goals, go and check that out. I'll leave that in the description down below. But that is it for this video. I thank you once more for watching. I really do appreciate you being here. And if you've made it 18 minutes, 30 seconds into the video, you're an absolute legend. I'll also let you know about a link down in the description. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about these sorts of things, or you want to have a chat about, you know, how I might be able to help you, there is, as I say, a link in the description down below. You can go and check that out. There's no pressure. For full transparency, it will take you to my funnel where you can learn a little bit more about my services and what I do indeed offer. You can book in a call there and we can have a nice, honest, chilled conversation. But once more, thanks for watching. Stay tuned. There's plenty more videos coming, 2 to 3 YouTube videos every single week now. I'll see you in the next one in a bit.